Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Changing Minds podcast. My name is Owen Fitzpatrick, and I am so delighted for you to be joining me. Now, maybe you're sitting there and you're watching me on YouTube. If so, hello. And maybe you're not. Maybe you're listening to me through, I don't know, Spotify or iTunes or Google Play or one of those, Stitcher or something like that. And you're listening to me through your earphones. So I'm very close to your ear. If so, hello, I am entering your brain. Anyway, enough about me just talking silly. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about an area that I'm very, very, very in love with, and that is storytelling. In particular, I want to talk about stories that change your mind or stories that change our mind, stories that we tell ourselves and how the stories that we tell ourselves determine a lot of what we believe. A big part of belief leadership is part of the scaled model is the stories element. And this is really about the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And what's really critical is to be able to learn how you can be more effective at changing the stories that you tell yourself. So you start to empower yourself with stories that allow you to think about your life and experience life in a radically different way. So what I want to do is I want to talk about some of the important elements of storytelling and the stories that we tell ourselves. I want to talk about some of the different characters that we can play, some of the different elements that we need to consider when we are telling stories. And by using story science, some of the works of Joseph Campbell, of Christopher Vogler, as well as the wonderful Robert McKee, Bob McKee, who I've been fortunate enough to count as a mentor, I've got a lot of insights into storytelling that I want to apply to the stories we tell ourselves. So strap in, get yourself ready, get yourself excited. We are going to have fun today, or at least I'm going to have fun because I'm going to be talking about something I nerd about all the time. So hopefully you can come with me and you can enjoy yourself too. It's almost like you can be a fly on the wall while you're watching somebody else just do what they love. And that's what you're going to watch here. So let's talk about storytelling. And first of all, one of the things to realize is that we tell ourselves lots of stories, and we tell ourselves stories about what is true and why it's true. So in many ways, we interpret the world through the stories that we tell ourselves. And we tell ourselves stories about what's happening, and then we tell ourselves stories about why it's happening, what it means. We always try to put every experience we have into meaning. Even if you think about this whole question, what do my dreams mean? What we do is we try to figure out, metaphorically speaking, oh, I had a dream about a sandwich. That must mean that I'm going to be rich. Now, I don't know how people connect. I'm pretty sure that's not an effective example of dream interpretation. But so often what we do is we believe in this notion that, oh, I dreamt about this. That means this. But we do the same thing in reality. We experience something and then we look for the meaning of it and we tell ourselves a story about what we think that means. And the problem with that is that we then start to create or cultivate a world full of stories that we find ourselves trapped in. And we're trapped in the sense that we are surrounded by the characters that we've created, and we're surrounded by the meanings. And those meanings become the very beliefs that we hold dear. So beliefs that you have are ideas that you feel certain about. Beliefs will help you form stories, but stories also help you form beliefs. So the stories we tell ourselves are affected and influenced by the beliefs we have, but the stories we tell also influence the beliefs that we have. So by changing the stories you tell yourself, it's one effective way of changing the beliefs that you have. And by changing the beliefs you have, that in turn can help you to tell yourself new stories also. So I want to dive into that, but I also want you to be aware of that. On the one hand, there's the stories that you tell yourself. On the other hand, there's the stories that other people tell you, because we also listen to the stories that other people tell us. And we are influenced by the stories that people tell us. So people tell us stories about how things work. They create, for example, a narrative in the media about the left or the right, about this group of people or that group of people. And before you know it, you're now drinking the Kool-Aid. You're now believing in it. Or let's say it's not the media. Let's say it's social media. I mean, the amount of times I heard during COVID or whatever, it's like, well, I've done my research. And that really translates to, I've gone online and searched on Facebook or Google with very strong, very clear parameters that give me the kind of information I want to read as opposed to actually investigating it. Everyone became a researcher. Everyone became an expert. And people were saying, oh, I don't believe what the medical establishment says, which is fine because, an awful lot of the stuff they say might be a little bit of, have other agendas attached perhaps sometimes. But then they would turn around and say, this is the reality and not giving their sources. Or if they did give us sources, it's some random, person online that has an idea and believes in a specific conspiracy. I'm not here to talk about conspiracy and whatnot. What I'm simply here to point out is that we all have stories that we hear from others and they can influence us as well. So we've got stories we tell ourselves that influence us, stories that other people tell us that influence us, and also stories that we hear other people tell other people. So we are witnessing people telling stories to others where we pick up from those examples. And so whenever you watch two people interact with each other or communicate with each other, one person telling the other person's stories tends to give you a lot of information yourself. You tend to start to buy into that information as well. So it's constant. We see the stories that people are telling us, the stories that we're telling ourselves, the stories people are telling others. All of it tends to become internalized by us. And each of these stories have characters in them. They have a certain genre in them. And most of the time, we also find ourselves as a character. And this is something that I realized when I worked as a therapist, that people would typically come in as one of two types of people. They'd either come in to me as the villain or the victim. The villain was, I've ruined my life. I'm a disaster. Everything I touch turns to rubbish. I am a terrible person. I'm my own worst enemy. I'm just not good enough. And then other people would come in like a victim, where they'd say, oh, my parents ruined me. My past destroyed my life. It's just so unfair. I'll never catch a break. I'm just so unlucky. And so some people would position their entire reality as them being the victim of badness. Other people would position their entire reality as being them as the primary cause of their own disappointment and unhappiness. And there was also, I suppose, if we're talking about villains and victims, there's also people who I call extras. These are people that feel like they're just ignored. They're irrelevant in life. They're literally watching on. They're like an extra in a TV show or a movie where they have no impact on the world and they're just living a, invisible life. They feel like they've just got no impact on the world. And what all of these three characters have in common is none of them are positioned as the hero. And the hero is not the superhero, but the hero is the main protagonist in a story that goes through adversity and learns from a guide how to overcome that adversity, adversity, is able to overcome that adversity. I've got to say that word. It says I have no problem in having adversity. I need to be able to pronounce it now. That adversity in such a way that it provided them with what they needed to in order to be able to succeed and live happy ever after. So that's a hero. Now, what's interesting is that villains can become heroes, and villains can become heroes by making new choices. If a villain decides to make a new set of choices, they can become the main character, the hero of a redemption plot, a redemption story, where they redeem themselves by making new decisions. They learn from the error in their ways, and they start being nicer to themselves, start making better choices, better decisions moving forward. Victims can become heroes by recognizing the control or indeed the influence they have. When a victim turns into a hero, it simply happens because they suddenly become aware of the fact that I can do something about this. I don't have to live in this world of being a victim. I can take an action, I can take charge, I can take control, and I can overcome the adversity that I'm facing at that time. And so victims can turn into heroes by recognizing they can influence the world. So again, villains become heroes by choice, making new choices. Victims become heroes by learning the power of their influence. And then finally, extras can become heroes by recognizing that they can step up and they can choose to influence the world more. So it's a combination of making the choice to be able to influence the world more and step up and let more people know about why they matter and about how they can make a positive difference to their life. And so it's important that these two notions of recognizing that you've got choices, you can make new choices, new decisions, and recognizing that you have the power to influence the world and influence others and influence yourself, those are the two keys towards turning every story around. If you're ever finding yourself talking to yourself about why you're struggling and you end up sounding like a victim or you end up sounding like a villain, ask yourself, what new choices can I make, or what can I influence? What can I control? And by doing so, that can literally change the story you're telling yourself. It's quite powerful, really, transformational, if we're being honest. So really, really important to notice the stories you're telling yourself and how you're positioning yourself in that way. Now, when we talk about being characters in a story, one of the things we tend to do is we tend to identify with different types of characters. And there's two core types of characters that we tend to identify with. One is a character that reminds us of ourselves. So this is a character that we can relate to, right? A character that we say, oh, this person's just like me. And that is a character that immediately we connect with because we can see ourselves in them. But there's also the characters that we want to be. This is the sort of the James Bond character, the character that personifies cool or personifies sophistication, personifies everything we've always wanted. And so those two different types of characters become the very characters that appeal to us. And so again, leveraging this into something useful. What examples can you find of people that you can relate to that have successfully achieved some of the results that you've wanted? What are some examples of people that you can relate to, characters that you can relate to, that have dealt with the problems or adversity that you've dealt with and overcome it? And what are the ways in which they've used their brain to be able to create change in their life? That's the first question. But you can also ask, in terms of the heroes or the people or the characters that you can tell that are people that you've always wanted to be like, once again, what are the lessons you can learn from the people who are the kind of people that you want to be more like? Again, looking for the lessons that they've learned, the lessons that you can learn from them. Because at the end of the day, as you connect to these characters, you want to be able to leverage that connection to be able to learn from them. And that means being able to figure out, what are the lessons I can learn from the role models? What are the lessons I can learn from the people that I can relate to? So it's a little bit like the other episode I do in the Change of Minds where I talked about allies and I talked about mentors. And the difference is that allies are people that you sort of relate to, and mentors are people that you can learn from. But once again, in this case, you can certainly find yourself learning lessons from people you identify with, as well as people that you've always wanted to be like. And it's about learning those lessons so that those lessons can become part of the story that you tell yourself, and therefore can help you in that way. We then have understanding your identity. Your identity is a set of beliefs that you have about yourself, which is really the stories you tell yourself about who you are. And these stories, if I ask you, who are you? You could give me lots of answers. You could answer from a demographic point of view and tell me your age and where you're from and all that sort of stuff. Your name. You could tell me about your attitudes, what your attitudes are, what your opinions are. You could talk about your beliefs, your deep set of beliefs, your spiritual or religious beliefs, or your overall beliefs. You could tell me about what your emotions are, the kind of personality you have, the feelings you feel, the values that are important to you. You could talk about the skills or qualities that you have, or even your biography, your history, what led you to where you are today. But often when we're asked who we are, we give labels which tell people about the community that we're in. And so what you want to do is you want to recognize the stories you're telling yourself. Are you limiting your identity? Are you limiting who you are by the descriptions that you're using, the story you're telling other people as to who you are? Because every single time you answer the question, who are you? You're deleting information, right? You're reducing the information that you're giving to people. Because if you ask me who I am and I said, well, I'm a loving son, well, I'm telling you about one aspect or area of my life. I'm not telling you about so many other of the areas that I am. I'm not talking about me as a psychologist or me as a colleague or me as a friend or any of those things. So what's imperative is that you recognize that you're always going to be limiting yourself in your identity based on the story you tell yourself. And the key is to recognize, what are the stories you're telling yourself that are limiting you full time? What are the stories you're telling yourself that limit what you're capable of? And recognizing those stories and understanding them means being able to identify, as well as understanding what limits you're putting on yourself, also recognizing what is the community you're identifying with. And this is when we call the notion of us versus them. We live in a polarizing world whereby it's very easy for us to immediately look for, what side am I on? And there's the we, which is our groups, which allows us to connect to others. And then there's the they, which is whether it's like they becomes the government. Oh, the government are, corrupt and that and whatever. Or the conspiracy theorists are corrupt, or we have a conspiracy about them being this dangerous group or against us. So for people extremely on the left, they becomes the right. For people extremely on the right, they becomes the left. And the problem with this is that we are using stories to turn everything into a hero versus a villain. Everything is becoming a hero versus villain. And we wonder why we're not able to communicate with people in terms of friends that have different political beliefs or different beliefs about the world. It's us versus them. It's a problematic story form to buy into. It's a problematic way to think about story and to think about your experiences and to think about your world. Because as long as we see the us versus them, we limit ourselves dramatically by always feeling, well, I'm in this group and they're in that group. And if you think about it from a tribal perspective, when we first started forming ourselves into various different tribes, in many ways, we had to be able to find ways to stay close to our fellow tribe members. So therefore, we bonded more closely with them. In his book, Against Empathy, Paul Bloom starts to talk about, well, one of the benefits, obviously, of empathy is it bonds you with people. But a dark side of empathy, or one of the dark sides of empathy, is it also positions you against certain people. So people that are outside of your, let's say, in-group, this is known as the in-group bias in psychology, people that are outside of your in-group, all of a sudden become more distant to you. And again, Robert Sapolsky in his great book, Behave, one of the things he alludes to is the fact that we categorize everything. And as soon as you categorize something, you make things inside of that category seem closer to each other and things outside of that category seem further away from the things inside that category. And that is true in terms of the labels we give ourselves. So when we're working on beliefs and when we're working on the stories we tell ourselves, we have to recognize in our stories, as long as we're telling stories about we versus they, we are going to be creating that dichotomy between us. And if you want to improve the stories you're telling yourself, try to find ways that we can tell the same story and we can transform it from a we versus they to a we, or turning that they into part of the we and readdressing and refocusing on the actual issue or the problem that we're trying to solve. So let's say in politics, you have, let's say, one side and the other side. If they want to be able to tackle it, they should be having the villain is not the other side. The villain is whatever the issue or problem they want to solve is. And that the we is them and the other side together. Whenever we start to think like this, it allows us to be able to look at story form in a dramatically different manner. So we can start to see that the key is for me to start to figure out how I can tell new stories in a more effective way. And recognizing the we and the they of your stories is a really important step that you need to take in order to start to do this. There's also the genres of the various different stories that we tell. Is your life more of a comedy or a tragedy? Is it a drama? Is it a horror show? The genre that we use whenever we tell a story, sometimes people, every time they talk about themselves, they have the victim story. They have this like everything's in a tragedy. Everything's sad. And even if they're talking about other things, they always focus on the sad news. Did you hear about this? It's awful, isn't it? They lap up the news and then they share the news. They don't even recognize they're doing it. But again, those stories mean they're constantly on the search for that. For people who tend to be very dramatic, you know those people who tend to be drama kings or drama queens, they tend to be very dramatic about everything. Once again, they're always searching for the dramatic. So the stories they tell are always drama filled. And then you've got the comedians, the people are always joking, right? A lot of Irish people tend to be quite good at this, is that we tend to be very naturally joking around about everything. I certainly noticed that since I moved to the States. When I come back to Ireland, the amount of times everyone just jokes is just off the charts. And I love it. And that's one of the things I most love about coming home. And when you have that way of looking at the world, it means that once again, the stories you're telling come from that comical lens. So you've got a tragic lens, a comical lens, a dramatic lens. They affect how that story plays out. You can tell the same story, and by turning it into a comedy, it's a very different meaning and experience, a set of belief that comes out of it than if it is a tragedy. So really important to recognize that as well. You've got the characters that you play. And again, we talked about the victim and the villain and all that. But there's one particular form of hero that we play quite a lot and we find is natural, and that's the underdog. And that is, once again, I think in many ways, Robert McKee talks about how we naturally identify with the underdog because the sheer forces of antagonism that we face in life is very metaphorically entwined with this notion that we are the underdogs in the world. And therefore, when we see a story about an underdog, we love it because we can relate to what it's like to struggle against huge forces of antagonism. And so I think it's important to recognize that seeing ourselves as an underdog can often be a very useful way of thinking, a very useful way of storytelling that helps us to be able to triumph over the challenges that we face. There's also looking at the transformation. And so in every story, like if you think about what a story is a journey whereby a protagonist goes through a transformation. And the transformation allows them, most of the time, at least if it's not a tragedy, to overcome the monster and to succeed, to win, to defeat the problem and to be happy ever after. And so the transformation can happen as a result of an insight, as a result of a skill, as a result of experience that they've gotten that changes the way in which they think, or it can happen on purpose. They deliberately set out in this quest or this journey. And sometimes it can even be by fortune, what is known in story form as the voyage, right? So you have the voyage where you go out and you have adventures, and by happenstance, your way of thinking has changed. Or you go on a quest where you search for the guru, the expert, the guide, the mentor that helps you to change. You study, like I studied NLP all those times and learned on purpose how to be able to take charge of my life. When I traveled the world, I went on incredible voyages, and that taught me a lot of lessons as well. So again, those are two examples of the transformation occurring in two different ways. There's by experience, right? When you learn by doing things wrong, by making mistakes, or by getting things right, you learn from failure, you learn from experience, you learn from the difficult times, you learn from adversity, and that promotes you and helps you and provides you with the transformation that you need. And then the insights and skill could be whenever you are studying something, you're learning something, and you're applying it and you're using it to be able to overcome the monster, the problem that you face. And that is the rags to riches notion. It is the defeating and beating the monster. It's this notion that we learn the skills, we learn how to use the force, Luke, so that we can Jedi our way towards happiness and success. And really, there's a combination of these different things, but how it's important, again, just to extract from all of these different insights. If you switch the genre, you switch the meaning. If you see yourself as an underdog, then that will oftentimes help you to be more motivated and driven and excited about the journey or the struggle or the challenge. As a mindset shift in terms of how you see the challenge as being something that is exciting to overcome. And if you look at the transformation, you can start to mine in your experiences, in the stories of your life, the insights and the skills and the experiences that you've learned, both on purpose and just by happenstance, by fortune. And by doing so, you can start to recognize that these lessons are the very things that can help you to be able to overcome the current challenges or the problems that you have. Because in most cases, we have the core elements of the hero's journey, and it's much more elaborate than this. But suffice to say for now that it starts with a hero that has an objective. Once upon a time, there was someone who wanted something, but a problem got in their way. And that problem, it was awful. They struggled and they weren't able to do it. There was a lot of pain there, and they knew they didn't solve it, there would be big problems. They thought X was the answer, and that didn't work for them. So soon they met a guide, the guide helped them and taught them that actually Y was the right answer. So they realized Y was the answer. This was the transformation. Then they implemented and acted on Y. They overcame the monster, defeated the problem, and therefore they achieved what they wanted. They lived happy ever after, and their life was amazing as a result. And in a nutshell, that structure is always the structure that we tell whenever we're talking about transformation. And so when you think about your own life, start to see the problems that you're facing as being the monsters in the story. See yourself with a clear objective. Notice what the problems that are stopping you. Recognize the pain and the struggle and how awful it is as the very thing that provides you with the motivation. Understand what you have been doing that wasn't working. What was that X? And then realize what is the insight, the idea, the new way of thinking that is the answer that will allow you to transform. And then go about and do what you can to act on this transformation, this insight, this skill, this idea, this experience, so that you can start to overcome the monster, defeat the problem, and start to build the kind of happy ever life that you deserve. By starting to recognize the power of stories and by being able to leverage the power of stories and turn them into something even more magnificent and powerful, this is one of the core ways that we can cultivate a massive mental belief. Because again, when you start to change the stories you tell yourself, you change the way you experience reality. And that in turn changes your beliefs. So I hope you found this useful. I hope you found this. I know it was quite deep. We covered a lot of material, but I hope you got plenty of notes, or you're going to listen back to this or watch back this again to take some notes. But thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourself. May the force, as always, continue to be with you. And may you all continue to believe better. Bye for now.